history, they have descended from the sky, bearing wisdom and superior technology. Or so it's said. Their ships have apparently been caught on film again and again, though never completely convincingly. And now these devious aliens are snatching citizens of the Earth and doing unspeakable things to them, according to thousands of Americans who claim to have been abducted by UFOs.
They're so ugly. This is terribly intrusive.
People have sperm taken, eggs taken, fetuses implanted in them, removed from them.
Scientists don't take reports of alien abduction seriously because there is no physical evidence, and there is no physical evidence because they don't actually exist.
Are extraterrestrials really coming to Earth and interfering with human affairs, or even interbreeding with us? Examine the most compelling evidence of UFO visitations with believers and skeptics alike.
You can see clearly a shining object, looks metallic.
Much of what people believe about UFOs and alien abductions is cultural, it's psychological. It's not out there, it's in here.
You decide, as science and the supernatural collide in our crowded skies.
Ships of an alien source are approaching from the sky. Radio contact has been attempted but cannot be established. Instructions are to prepare for an attack by an unknown enemy.
Our modern love-hate relationship with unidentified flying objects and their alien pilots has been going on for more than 50 years now. But some people think that aliens have been around far longer than we have, that indeed they've given our evolution the occasional shove in the right direction. How else could the ancients construct, say, the Great Pyramids of Giza, or the giant Nazca lines of Peru, which only make sense from the sky? How is it possible that Iron Age Europeans drew a humanoid in a spacesuit?
These creatures, they have found a way to come to the Earth. They could be more intelligent than we are.
Sure, it's possible that aliens came down and helped the ancient Egyptians build the pyramids, but the problem is there's no evidence for this. The assumption that humans aren't smart enough to have figured this out is frankly insulting.
UFO researchers who call themselves ufologists assign our close encounters with supposed visitors from outer space into 4 categories. There are close encounters of the first kind, where UFOs are seen at close range but leave no physical evidence behind. A startling encounter one afternoon in the skies over Mexico falls into this category. Early afternoon, March 5th, 2004. A Mexican military surveillance aircraft on a routine mission searching for drug smugglers records a sequence of unidentified objects, at one point numbering as many as 11. On the plane's infrared sensing system, the UFOs appear as bright points of light, but show no detail or structure. The airmen frantically search the skies for whatever is apparently flying alongside, but they can see nothing. There's only the infrared signal of something powerfully hot. Air traffic controllers say that they can see nothing unusual on their radar screens. In the end, the plane lands with the crew, air traffic control, and the military apparently clueless as to what has happened. We'll examine this close encounter of the first kind in greater detail later. But first, the other types of encounters. Close encounters of the second kind entail UFO sightings accompanied by physical traces of their visit. Many have argued that the famous crop circle phenomenon falls into this category. People spot eerie balls of light over fields of wheat, and later find crops flattened into spectacular formations. Recently, strange circular formations in grass have been associated with UFO sightings in Mexico. Then, of course, there are the famous close encounters of the third kind. This involves actual contact, often by speaking telepathically to alien beings. At the far end of the spectrum are those who have had close encounters of the fourth kind, also called alien abduction.
When I regained consciousness, I was on a table.
From the first, Hollywood latched on to the idea of big-eyed brutes from beyond doing nasty things to us. But for those who believe they've been through the real thing, it's absolutely terrifying.
They're so ugly, and they're repulsive. And sometimes I wish I could think, oh, gee, it's a dream. You know, this isn't happening, but it is happening. I had several abductions when I was a child. I mean, very young. They happen very young. It starts from almost cradle to grave. That's the way it goes. Once you're in their program, you're in their program forever.
Pam is a patient of Dr. David Jacobs, an associate professor of history at Temple University, a leading proponent of the abduction phenomenon. For more than 30 years, he's worked with so-called abductees, using hypnosis to help them regain buried memories of the experience.
This is a subject that is the fringe of the fringe, and as an academic to study something like this is not a real good career move, shall we say. But one does not have the opportunity to participate in the understanding of a phenomenon of potentially enormous importance very often in one's life.
Jacobs believes that at least 5 million Americans have been abducted by aliens and has heard hundreds of abduction tales, remarkably similar ones.
I'm sleeping. I have a sense that the room is very still. Sometimes there's a crispness in it. I don't know how to describe that, but there's a different feeling in the room. And then the sound starts in my ear with the like that, and it goes on. And then I can see a light, and I see figures.
Subjects also report that they can't move, as if they are paralyzed. The next thing they know, somebody or something comes up to them and has them rise, and often they fly directly through a closed window. Then it's up into a spacecraft, where they join other abductees and await their fate. What happens next is universally ghastly. But before we hear the rest of Pam's horrifying story, a word of caution for those of you who might think you've been abducted and go in search of a therapist who uses hypnosis, guided imagery, etc., to recover buried memories of such events. Be careful what you want to remember.
It's just dangerous. They're screaming in many cases. They're crying. They're rolling on the floor. What emerges in their hypnotic sessions feels intensely real to them.
Dr. Susan Clancy, a psychologist and an expert in memory, has spent 6 years studying UFO abductees. She believes that abduction memories are not recovered in therapy, they're created there.
Every abductee I worked with obtained their memories through hypnosis or what they called guided imagery. I don't know anybody that spontaneously developed memories of being abducted by aliens.
Abductees often appear rational and sane, and most are acutely aware that their stories sound fantastic. But they counter, why would anyone choose to remember such painful events? We'll take a trip into the human psyche to answer this question and find some startling biological answers. We'll also re-examine the Mexican Air Force's amazing infrared footage to see if there might be a more down-to-earth explanation. But first, let's start with the basics. How did the obsession with UFOs begin? Perhaps not surprisingly, the modern era of UFO watching heated up during the first years of the Cold War, as people were craning their necks skyward, fretting about spy planes and incoming missiles. The event that really kicked off the craze took place in June of 1947. Kenneth Arnold was flying his private plane through the Cascade Mountains in Washington state when he saw a bright blue-white flash in the distance. He looked out and apparently saw some unknown objects weaving in and out of the mountain peaks at high speed, flying with incredible agility. Arnold told his story to a local newspaper, and the flying saucer craze was born. Later that year came a watershed UFO event, the incident that refuses to die, its name spoken with reverence by believers and annoyance by skeptics. Roswell. Strange debris was found on a ranch outside of Roswell, New Mexico, near a U.S. Army airfield. The next day, a local paper ran with the scoop, boldly announcing that the Army had an alien spacecraft on its hands. The military quickly countered that the debris was actually just the remains of a weather balloon. But the damage was done. It didn't help that they were covering something up. The so-called weather balloon was actually a secret test of a new spy balloon. It was the birth of a new era. Post-Roswell, thousands of UFOs have been reported, and conspiracy theories have been spun with wild abandon. And there are the photographs and videos, lots and lots of them. Some of them not quite as convincing as others. In the annals of UFO sightings, not many incidents can match the day that darkness at midday fell over Mexico City, and not one, but dozens of people caught something out of this world on tape. July 11th, 1991. A total eclipse of the sun begins to dim the skies over Mexico City. Hundreds of people pointed their video cameras upward to capture the event. For UFO researcher Guillermo Arguin, it was a remarkable sight.
I went up to my roof to shoot the event. When I saw a shining light in the sky, I focused my camera. I understand that what I filmed is an oscillating UFO, not a planet or a star.
Arguin was not alone in what he recorded. Sergio Fuentes was celebrating the eclipse with his family when he too turned towards the sky.
My wife and kids insisted that I don't look directly at the sun without wearing any protection. I paid attention to them, and I tried to continue filming everything that happened. I kept holding the camera, making sure it was pointing at the sun.
Later, when Fuentes checked the tape, he was amazed to find that he had filmed a UFO. Over the next several days, reports of UFO sightings flooded in, causing a media frenzy. Nationally known investigative journalist Jaime Maussan hosted a marathon 10-hour program on UFOs that included a discussion of the sightings. He asked viewers to go back and look at what they recorded with their handycams.
When I presented this in television, many people called to say, I saw it. You can see clearly a shining object, looks metallic, with a black shadow underneath, a silver disc-shaped object. We believe that this was not a star or some kind of problem with the camera, distortion of the camera. The video is the evidence to prove that this is real. And that day, my life changed completely. Because from that moment on, people wanted me to talk more about UFOs than anything else.
Some find the evidence less than life-altering. Writer and skeptic Mario Mendez Acosta debated Maussan over the 91 eclipse sightings, and he thinks that the national obsession with UFOs has more to do with Maussan himself than any visitations from outer space.
Just imagine that your most widely known TV anchorman suddenly became converted into a UFO full-time believer. I think the United States they would have fired him. It's the complete futility of all these matters that really appalls us, you know?
Appalling or not, 13 years after the eclipse, Maussan still runs a weekly show, and his devoted viewers continue to send in supposed UFO videos.
The Mexican people embrace this phenomenon, and they have been able to produce more evidence than any other country in the world.
Indeed, they have. Mexico is now a hotbed of UFO research and a prime location for observing questionable things in the sky. Groups of amateur ufologists regularly give up a night's sleep to try to make contact with the lights in the sky, meditating on them, flashing lights at them. If the truth about Mexico's UFOs is out there, it may be nearer than the stars. It may be in Stockholm. Astronomer and photographer Tom Callan is the producer of a planetarium show at the Swedish Museum of Natural History.
A lot of people nowadays don't have an understanding of the night sky. They don't even know some of the basic constellations. And so when they go outside and they see something that's unusual that they don't understand, it's easy to jump to the conclusion that, hey, that funny light in the sky, that's intelligent life, some sort of aliens are piloting some kind of a vehicle, perhaps they're in the sky, without stopping to think perhaps it's a meteor, perhaps it's a satellite.
Callan believes that the Mexico City UFO witnesses did see something truly awe-inspiring. Something beyond the surly bonds of Earth, but not necessarily something under alien control.
In the Mexico City video, we see a sky that's already darkened because the eclipse is already in progress. We see a few clouds floating around, and then the camera zooms in on this object.
Using a commercially available computer program that plots the sky on any given day from any given point on Earth, Tom will recreate what happened in the skies over Mexico on that fateful day.
Here's the sun about to be eclipsed by the moon. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and run the program forward about 30 times normal speed so that you're able to see what is happening during this eclipse event.
As the computer imitates the moon passing in front of the sun, the sky darkens and several heavenly bodies brighten. In the exact spot where the UFO was recorded, bingo, an especially bright object emerges.
And here we can very clearly see we've got the planet Venus here, which is the, what I'm pretty sure is what the object is that these people in Mexico City photographed.
Venus, the second planet from the sun, and the brightest object in the sky after the sun and moon. But why does Venus look so much like a blurry alien spacecraft? Tom believes the camera itself, in trying to focus on such a bright but distant object, is creating a three-dimensional effect.
Here's Venus in the sky. This looks very much like a zoomed up image of a planet. Now we have this extreme zoom up here. This again has been slowed down quite a bit, and we can see some effects of moving the camera around. That dark line that we're seeing here, that's not the underside of anything in particular. What we're seeing is an artifact from the camera. It just takes and makes a common, everyday celestial object look kind of mysterious.
But not so fast. Everyday celestial objects can't be responsible for all of Mexico's UFO sightings. Take, for example, this remarkable object seen hovering in the vicinity of an active volcano called Popocatépetl. That's clearly not a planet or a star, and it certainly isn't behaving like an airplane. The object was captured on video by architect Mario Ramirez, who lives in the shadows of the volcano. Like many here, he believes that volcanic activity attracts the UFOs to Mexico, and he claims to have seen an entire fleet of ships fly into the crater back in 1988.
Empecé a investigar esto porque vi una nave muy grande.
I saw a very big ship, about 300 meters in diameter. It had a lot of lights and windows. It spun on its center, then advanced towards the volcano. I have seen them go in and come out in groups of 30 at incredible speeds, going towards space. They live in the center of the volcano.
Back in 2000, Ramirez was studying a stone formation near the volcano that he thinks is some sort of ancient astronomy textbook, when something caught his attention.
Estaba yo aquí en esta piedra, haciendo observaciones con el cerro Tlapaltepec.
I was here at the rock making observations of Popo. I set up my camera, and then I saw a flash. And I wondered, why am I seeing a flash from the mountain?
What Ramirez eventually records appears to be an object that hovers over the distant mountain.
I looked up, and there was a UFO up in the clouds. I thought that they were trying to communicate with me.
It remains aloft for nearly 2 minutes before disappearing behind the peak. What does our professional wet blanket, Tom Callan, think of this intriguing object?
The volcano video. That to me looks very much like a zoomed in image that, for all intents and purposes, is probably a large bird. And if you look at it, it appears to be flapping at the same time, as if there are extensions on it that are flapping, and that's something that I wouldn't expect in some kind of a extraterrestrial vehicle of any kind either.
Of course, not all unidentified flying objects are simply cases of mistaken identity. Some appear suspiciously like cheap old special effects, or the occasional pie tin tossed into the sky. Enough with the video evidence. What about close encounters of the second kind? The cases where the UFO reportedly leaves actual physical evidence behind. We'll be looking at the footprints of a supposed UFO and asking what on earth could have made them. In September 2004, a series of rings appeared on a small, isolated patch of land near Guadalajara. The landowner called in architect and UFO researcher Daniel Dominguez and his team to investigate. They spent a few nights observing the field, and sure enough, a spherical light appeared.
It passed directly over us, and its intensity of light went up. Then the light got lower, and it continued its trajectory.
Dominguez claims that the light made changes in the grass that no man-made object could cause. For 4 weeks, they've been mapping out the circles and measuring their growth. They're also taking soil samples to test for radiation, which Dominguez believes caused the circles.
We got this sample on September 17th. As you can see, the grass has a greener tone, and the blade's width is bigger than the rest of it. And this shows us that it was subjected to this radiation. From the evidence we've gotten, I'm inclined to think that these circles are products of a light energy that is produced by an object that comes from further away than the stars.
But Dr. Laura Guzman thinks the answer may be really down to earth. She is a mycologist at the University of Guadalajara, Mexico's first lady of fungus, so to speak. But what on earth does fungus have to do with UFOs?
This is a very big piece of mycelium growing around maybe a piece of wood or root.
Eureka, fungal mycelium. Why should we care? Because mycelium grows outward from a central point in rings, often called fairy rings. Some fungi will create a ring of dead grass, but others will actually fertilize the grass and cause it to be greener and lusher in the circle than in the surrounding area, especially if it's being fed by rotting organic matter like dead tree roots.
These pieces of wood stimulate the growth of the fungi, and that's why sometimes there are many fairy rings growing, because there are wood under the soil. In my scientific opinion, I think that the thing that causes the fairy rings is a fungus, and there is no another explanation.
But there are actually many thousands of fungi found in soil, and only 50 are known to cause the rings. To confirm that this is a fungus responsible for fairy rings, Dr. Guzman takes the sample back to her lab and puts it under the microscope. She looks for a telltale sign, a small protrusion on individual fungal cells, and confirms her suspicions.
The fairy rings that we saw today were formed by fungi.
What about Dominguez's claim that these rings were caused by radiation from the UFO? Dr. Guzman had the sample tested, and found no elevated levels of any radiation. So this close encounter of the second kind turns out to be a close encounter of the mushroom kind. Mexico is awash in encounters of the first, second, and third kinds, although the third type, the actual encounter with aliens, is virtually always achieved through mental telepathy and heavy use of flashlights, making the contact a bit hard to verify. Curiously, though, almost no one in Mexico has reported being abducted by aliens. This is in sharp contrast to the neighbors up north. According to some polls, millions of Americans have been taken into UFOs and poked, probed, and even impregnated. Why this division north and south of the Rio Grande?
This sort of thing is a culture-bound belief. I mean, presumably, if aliens are in fact abducting people, they're not simply abducting Americans, but presumably Mexicans and Brazilians and Portuguese at the same rates.
I'd be the happiest person in the world if someone would say that this really isn't happening, this is some kind of who knows what, and I'd be very happy, but unfortunately I've been involved for so long.
But before we enter the terrifying world of alien abduction, let's return to that strange event recorded by a Mexican military aircraft on infrared. Nearly a dozen unidentified objects for which the military could find no explanation. Could this be definitive proof of alien visitations? On that fateful March afternoon in 2004, a routine military flight became a frantic effort to identify objects that seemed to be flying parallel to the plane. Invisible to radar and the naked eye, they were visible only in infrared. The Mexican military released the infrared records of the flight's encounter with unidentified objects, creating a sensation in the media. Captain Alejandro Franz of the Mexican UFO research group Alcyon decided to investigate for himself. Franz is a sort of skeptical believer. Though he thinks UFOs have visited Earth, he feels that investigators must rule out all alternative explanations before reaching a conclusion.
I have been investigating these things because almost 90% of the times they are not UFOs. They are human-made, or they are planets or asteroids or many other things that can be identified.
A pilot himself, Captain Franz wants to recreate the flight path of the military plane. Then, at the point where the crew encountered the UFOs, turn the plane directly toward the UFO sightings, because he thinks the objects might still be out there. The plane takes off from Villahermosa and climbs to 11,000 feet, heading almost due east.
We are now at the same altitude that the airplane was. So now we need to go to the first track point and go east, following the track until 89 degrees west longitude. To keep the same track of the military plane.
The plane reaches the first point of contact with the UFOs. Franz instructs the pilots to head northwest, the same direction that the infrared camera was pointing. He's seen lights out that way before and thinks he knows exactly what the military was tracking.
I have been flying and crossing the Gulf of Mexico hundreds of times. These lights in the Gulf of Mexico are seen all the year, almost by night. Any pilot could see them in good weather conditions and good visibility. You could see them from 140, 150 miles out.
About 60 miles out from shore, and nearly 100 miles from the last contact point, Franz spots what he's been looking for: the massive offshore oil well complex known as Cantarell. Even at 15,000 feet, the structures appear enormous. Drilling platforms can be as high as 40 stories. The flames, which can reach hundreds of feet, are caused by burning off excess gas to reduce pressure on the wells.
So they are there. I feel happy because I was confirming my theory. It's completing part of my investigation, and it's giving me support to keep investigating more.
Franz feels sure that this is the source of the infamous UFOs. But could these fires really have registered some 100 miles away on a military plane's infrared surveillance system? And why do they appear to be flying? Jim Safran seemed to be the guy to ask. He teaches and certifies infrared technicians and uses the technology himself to examine oil refineries and oil well platforms.
First of all, we haven't established that these objects are flying. Some might get a sense here that the objects are moving. In fact, this is an optical illusion which is created by the clouds moving with respect to the objects, not the other way around. It's likely that what we're seeing is a very hot source of heat. And in this case, since we're out over the ocean, a reflection of that heat off of the surface of the ocean. It could be the flame and some of the smoke, or it could be just the flame. I would like to believe that there may be UFOs, but I just don't see evidence of that here.
It's one thing to refute cold, clinical evidence of UFOs captured on video or infrared. It's an entirely different thing to deal with compelling first-hand testimony of contact with aliens, especially if that contact is utterly brutal, with terrifying implications. What are we to make of people who have vivid memories of being abducted and subjected to bizarre medical and sexual procedures? If abduction scenarios are real, and advocates claim that millions of people show signs that they are, then a sinister threat beyond anything humans have imagined is upon us. But is it real? For the past 50 years, thousands of people have come forward to report that they have been abducted by aliens. But abduction proponent David Jacobs thinks this is just the tip of the iceberg, based on a survey he helped conduct in 1992.
If you ask people, have they been abducted, about 1 million will say yes. But in fact, most people don't know that they've been abducted because the phenomenon is forgotten almost as soon as they return from the event.
Apparently, the extraterrestrials try to block people's memories of the abduction, but it's an imperfect block. Hypnosis, Jacob says, can unblock those memories.
Some people remember parts of abductions, they remember sequences of abductions, and they remember whole abductions. Hypnosis, for reasons that we do not understand, sort of opens the gates, and suddenly people start to remember the long-term memory that is remembered in an odd way for the first time. So the only way that they've been able to remember this is by getting into a really relaxed, focused, psychological state.
What they remember is remarkably similar. Pam's experience is typical. She finds herself awake but immobilized in bed. Small gray beings conduct her up to a waiting spacecraft. There, she joins others in a waiting area.
Oftentimes I look around and I think that the other people that are sitting there look like they're really out of it. And Dr. Jacobs will tell me, well, they're probably looking at you thinking that you're really out of it too.
Sometimes there are lessons. Sometimes there are physical examinations, and worse.
The little gray guys are the escorts, and they're just little guys, and they have big eyes, and they're very, very thin. Then there's the taller ones that look like them, but are more intellectual. Generally, it starts with a staring procedure, and they stare at you, and the staring procedure lasts for a long time, and all you can see generally are these huge eyes, and you're lost in it. Sometimes it's an information dump, sometimes they're doing physical things to you. Sometimes while they're doing that, someone is putting an instrument up one's nose or in the ear. And sometimes it's very painful. Sometimes they botch it.
And sometimes things turn truly sinister.
people have sperm taken, eggs taken, fetuses implanted in them, removed from them.
Well, what I believe happens, and even at my age happens still, is that they take an embryo, which is a combination, once again, of us and them, and they insert it in us, and we carry it for about 10 weeks, and then they take it out. And then what they do with it, I've seen where they have bottles, these big bottles, and then they have these little ones suspended.
Pam is not alone. Thousands report nearly identical memories, awakening to find a light streaming into the bedroom, a feeling of paralysis and terror, levitation and transport to the examining room of a spacecraft by small gray humanoids, and examination by a much taller alien. How could so many people who do not know each other come up with such detailed and similar stories?
What that does suggest is that there is a common conception of what an alien abduction involves, from films, from TV shows, from written accounts. So the notion that because these people report similar things, this is an actual shared true experience is simply fallacious.
And then there is the method used to get to the memories, hypnosis. For a long time, hypnosis was thought to be a near magical window into people's memories. More recently, it's been discovered that hypnosis may be far more effective in creating memories than retrieving them. In a state of hypnosis, people are highly suggestible and eager to please the hypnotist, as anyone who has seen a hypnosis stage act knows.
You know what, I'm looking right now. This lady right here has your canary. You might want to go and ask for it back. Go and ask her to give you your canary back right now. Can I have my canary back? Please.
This can be quite entertaining when done in fun, but has the potential to do enormous harm in therapy. Dr. Susan Clancy has spent 6 years working with people who've recovered memories of UFO abduction while under hypnosis. She is certain that these so-called memories were created in therapy, not uncovered. Recent studies have shown that highly suggestible people will produce whatever memories the hypnotist is asking for.
So everyone put your sun cream on now. Make sure you cover your arms, cover your face as well.
The truth is, you're susceptible to cues that are given to you by the environment or by the hypnotist himself.
You might want to wrap your arms around you. You might want to huddle up. You're feeling colder and colder and colder. Ooh.
It's just too difficult because you will develop memories that feel real, and neither you nor your therapist will be able to distinguish between whether the memories correspond to reality or not.
Jacobs counters that he never leads a patient to recover memories of abduction.
Obviously, I, as the hypnotist, am quite aware of those problems. And most people who come to me are aware of those problems as well. They don't want to be led. They don't want to pick up things in popular culture. Once you control for them, once you can understand what the difficulties with hypnosis are, once you can figure out a methodology which takes that into account and controls for it, then you begin to get these stories that come out that are just extraordinary.
These people that come to them because they believe that they may have been abducted by aliens, and they believe it enough to go seek out somebody who is going to help them validate this. That's enough right there.
But why on earth would people choose to believe that they'd been abducted and violated by extraterrestrials? For one thing, they may have run into highly popularized abduction checklists such as this one. Missing time, nightmares about UFOs, sleep disorders, unusual body sensations, unexplained marks on body, feelings of being watched. Okay, how many living, breathing human beings anywhere on Earth couldn't answer yes to a bunch of these? But could there be something else, something biological that contributes to the abduction phenomenon? Intriguing new evidence is coming to light from the realm of sleep research.
眠れなくてずっと布団の中で
I tried to fall asleep in my bed for a while. All of a sudden, my body became really stiff. Though I was still conscious, I wasn't able to move my body at all. I sensed the presence around me, then felt as though something was right by my feet. I saw an apparition like a pale old woman hunching over it, staring at me.
Sounds similar to the beginning stages of the alien abduction experience? With good reason, according to Japanese sleep researcher Dr. Kazuhiko Fukuda.
I like UFOs and science fiction, but I'm very doubtful that these things actually exist. Most people who experience alien abduction have a similar experience, waking up in the middle of the night, then realizing that the body can't move. They sense some presence in the room, and the presence is an alien. These basic experiences can all be explained by sleep paralysis.
For several years, Dr. Fukuda, a psychophysiologist at Fukushima University in Japan, has been studying sleep paralysis. It's commonly known here as kanashibari, or bound in metal, referring to the terrifying sense of immobility that sleep paralysis induces. Sleep paralysis occurs around REM, or rapid eye movement sleep. Because we dream during REM sleep, the brain temporarily disconnects our ability to move, so we won't act out our dreams and perhaps injure ourselves. It's an ingenious little mechanism, but if it fails to reconnect once you begin to emerge from sleep, you'll awake and feel paralyzed. In a sleep lab at the university, Dr. Fukuda attempts to recreate sleep paralysis. He attaches electrodes to the heads of subjects to monitor the brainwave activity as they sleep.
There is a noticeable difference between the brain waves of the dream state of normal REM sleep and the Kanashibari state of REM sleep. What we found is that the Kanashibari state of REM sleep is very similar to the state when people are awake. So when someone actually experiences sleep paralysis, they feel like they're awake.
After the subjects reach the correct REM stage, somewhere between dreaming and waking, Dr. Fukuda interrupts their sleep. Then he asks questions about what they were feeling at the moment. Many say that they were dreaming, and some report experiences that are consistent with sleep paralysis.
I could not move my hands. I felt like they were paralyzed.
Some people see hallucinations. For example, they feel some weight on their chest or stomach, and when they open their eyes, something is sitting on them or standing by their feet. Some hear strange sounds, or sometimes feel like their body is floating.
Dr. Clancy finds Dr. Fukuda's results compelling. In her 6-year study of abductees, every subject developed his or her beliefs after describing an episode that is consistent with a Kanashibari-type sleep paralysis.
You wake up in the middle of the night, you're unable to move, so you feel paralyzed, but you can still see things and hear things, and people will report seeing shadowy figures in the room or feeling like they're levitating. So you have dream mentation that's kind of like getting into your waking state. So maybe the images that you were dreaming about are there in your room.
As Dr. Clancy and Dr. Fukuda note, the kinds of interpretations given to sleep paralysis reflect the culture in which they occur. Kanashibari has been widely accepted in Japan. In the 1700s, the British feared a demonic incubus that attacked women as they lay in bed, unable to move. In Newfoundland, the condition is called old hag and takes the form of a frightening old witch that sits on the chest of the sleeper. In China, it's been known for centuries as ghost oppression. In Zanzibar, it's called Popobawa, a flying cycloptic dwarf. For a present-day American culture awash in UFO beliefs, perhaps it's natural for sleep paralysis to be interpreted as alien abduction. But the question remains, what could anyone gain from believing something so terrifying that aliens had abducted and violated them?
What is not often talked about is that there are huge positive benefits, that there's something bigger than us, something technologically superior that's out there. And it gives people a new outlook on their lives and the purpose of their lives and the world we live in. And that is an enormous benefit that I don't think has been really touched on by abduction researchers. I think they're sort of tone deaf to the positive benefits accrued from these experiences.
Close encounters of all varieties seem to be plaguing us with increasing frequency as time goes on. But does that mean they're genuine? If the aliens want to be seen, why not land on the White House lawn or at the Vatican? If they don't want us to realize that they're here, wouldn't they have the technology to hide from us? Wouldn't their mind blocks be impervious to our primitive hypnosis techniques? Then again, how could so many people be wrong?
There's a goal to this program, and what they say it is an integration into the society, not necessarily by the gray aliens, but by these hybrid beings who look quite human.
What if these creatures are real? What if all these videos are telling us that our planet is being observed? You see, you have to really try to open your mind.
The striking lack of evidence tells me that much of what people believe about UFOs and alien abductions is cultural, it's psychological. It's not out there, it's in here.
It's time for you to decide. But keep in mind this little tidbit that the history of civilization has bestowed on us. Keep it simple. Where a down-to-earth explanation suffices, why resort to out-of-this-world ones?